You're listening to #Impact, a podcast about stuff that matters. I am Regina Larco, founder of #Impact, and I'm thrilled to fill you in on what we are working on for you at the moment. Over the next couple of months, we are curating thought-provoking stories inspired by the Sustainable Development Goals. They are a blueprint for leadership, inspiring everyone to take action. From business to governments, from civil society to the nonprofit space. In our upcoming Season 5, our hosts based in Berlin, Seoul, Sydney and Hong Kong find a common language to address, measure and demonstrate impact as we sit down with stakeholders working across all sectors. As we are preparing for launching our most global season yet, you will get a sneak peek into the first exclusive Season 5 episodes from all around the world. This time, you get to follow me to a conversation I had in late 2019 at Google Hong Kong. Head over to #impact.com/season5 if you want to find out how you can get your voice heard on our channel too. Today, I sit down with Leonie Valentine, Managing Director, Sales and Operations at Google Hong Kong. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Leonie.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Such a wonderful place just to walk in, and there's so much color. People can imagine Google being such an innovative space.
It is.
It's the first time I'm here, so I feel inspired already.
Oh, good. It's and that's quite deliberate. You know, the floor that you're sitting on at the moment in Hong Kong has been purposefully designed to be a community space. So it's a place that we want to be, welcoming. We've got our cafe, our own barista here, and in fact, the entire floor is accessible. So we made sure that it was fully wheelchair accessible. We put a wheelchair bathroom in, and also all of our signage is Braille legible. So I wanted to make sure that we actually had a showcase in Hong Kong for disability access.
That's fantastic. And I'm so thrilled that you are taking the time to speak with me for a very special season of #Impact, where we are focusing on the Sustainable Development Goals. And when we are looking at these 17 goals that we will address throughout the season, just looking from quality education to climate action, from sustainable cities and communities to decent work and economic growth, it doesn't matter which of these 17 goals, and we're looking at this colorful chart here now, what we're looking at, it is so obvious actually that technology has such an important role to play in tackling, measuring, tracking, reviewing and also implementing all of these goals. And that's why I'm even more thrilled that I can sit down with one of the tech leaders globally to also hear a little bit about how you locally here in Hong Kong are addressing to reach and make an impact with some of these sustainable development goals. So which are some of the initiatives that you are working on here in Hong Kong that you could share with our listeners?
Yeah, no problem at all. So it's actually quite interesting because we didn't plan to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals at all, but it's something that has been really at the front of my mind most recently. I've been involved in a couple of talks with UBS and a couple of events with UBS here in Hong Kong. And they're a big supporter of the Sustainable Development Goals as well. And so I'd recently bought my daughter the bands. You get these charity bands. So you get a little wristband that you keep one and then you give one to a friend to actually promote the Sustainable Development Goals. And I got the clean water and sanitation for my daughter, which is terrific. And then I've recently got the quality education one for myself and my husband. So when I think about some of the pressing needs here in Hong Kong, education is key. So giving hope to the youth of Hong Kong through quality education, building a stronger, more sustainable middle class for Hong Kong, and then also I think increasing the number of people and the pipeline of talent in Hong Kong, particularly around the skills that are in most demand. And, Google actually did a 3-year research project in Hong Kong called Smarter Digital City. We released the third of those reports in September of this year. So it was a study from 2017 to 2019, and it looked at what is holding Hong Kong back from being a truly digital city. And one of the key things that actually came through in this, massive piece of research that we did was talent. There is generally, unfortunately, a lack of tech talent in Hong Kong. And that ranges from the obvious things that we'd think about in terms of digital marketing, all the way through to data science, AI and machine learning. So we surveyed both corporates and small businesses in terms of the sorts of programs that they wanted to implement, how they wanted to improve their businesses, the sorts of projects that they wanted to deliver for the benefits of Hong Kong citizens. But a constant theme was there's just not enough people here that know how to do these things that are Hong Kongers who want to build the next generation of tech for Hong Kong. So we'd identified that as a problem, and then we started to do something about it from 2017 onwards. So a lot of our local programs here in Hong Kong relate to education, and that can be anything from our Computer Science First program. So CS First is a globally massively scaled free online coding curriculum. It's available for kids as young as 6 all the way through to 16 plus. And it teaches the basics of coding through MIT's Scratch program, but it makes it really interesting and interactive with videos and coursework. Now, the really interesting thing about that program is that anyone can be a teacher for it. So I've even gone into my kids' school and attempted to teach CS First. Not well.
How did that go?
Well, it was fascinating, and I have so much respect for teachers after trying to control a classroom full of Year 3 and Year 4 students. Can you imagine?
I cannot, but yeah. I'm really impressed that you dared to do it.
I did dare. I did
That's
one
yeah.
term of trying to do the CS First education, just so I could experience it myself. But the program's terrific. So what we did in Hong Kong with that program, through volunteers, I mean, this is not a program that we had invested a lot of money in. We looked at the global program. We got a group of volunteers together through our Women at Google committee, and then we started to work with local schools. So in that program, what we've been able to do over the past 3 years is reach more than 1,000 Hong Kong kids. We had more than 40 schools involved last year, and going into 2020 we want to double that. So we're going to go to 60 schools, and we hope to reach more than 2,000 kids aged 6 to 16 with that program. So we've got wonderful partners in the local community like Kids for Kids. Have you heard of Kids for Kids?
I have.
It's really cool. So Michelle Lai's organisation, they actually...
They haven't been on the show yet.
Oh,
but
you should
yeah.
get Michelle. So they get kids to go and train other kids. So, and some of our team as well have volunteered to go and be part of that classroom environment, myself included. So it's terrific. So we have these fantastic programs like CS First. Then what we also look at is digital skills education. But again, if I'm talking to agencies, I'm talking to my major clients, they just can't find enough people who understand digital marketing, whether that be performance-based marketing or as a brand marketer, to be able to implement the sorts of things they want to do to grow their businesses or bring attention to their new products. So we've been running different programs in Hong Kong for some time. We had a program called Squared that has an online component as well as a classroom-based component. We've been running that for, I think, about 5 years. And the one that we launched probably about 2 years ago is, again, a massively scaled international program called Digital Garage. Digital Garage is aimed at individuals and SMBs. And our goal this year was to teach 10,000 individuals using that platform. And I'm happy to say that we pretty much achieved that goal. So we're also looking to sort of 2x that and see if we can reach even more people with Digital Garage. Now, the trick in a place like Hong Kong, it's great that we've got scaled curriculum that's available in English, but 95% of the local population speak Cantonese. So one of the other things that we had to think about was how do we make that locally relevant? So CS First, we've translated the first couple of modules into Cantonese with volunteers. And then Digital Garage, we actually got sponsorship to be able to translate that program into Cantonese language as well. So Digital Garage is available in English, Mandarin and Cantonese for the local population. And we've had really good success with our clients and with some of the government agencies in terms of getting their own teams to adopt this program and use it as a way to improve digital skills of even their existing employees, as well as trying to put it into universities so some of those kids are a bit more job ready. So that's another one. And then, you know, in the research that we did, Smarter Digital City, it was really interesting. One of the things that surprised me most about that research, we asked Hong Kongers what skills did they think that they needed and what would they be interested in learning in tech. And you often think that people would, you know, kind of go to what's relevant to them, maybe learn about apps or a little bit of website design. But what actually came back, and I was super surprised, sure, app development was there, machine learning and AI as a skill that they wanted to learn about, and data analytics. And I'm like, really? That's kind of going from zero to hero in terms of skills. So one of the things that we realised was there's this terrific appetite in Hong Kong for Hong Kongers at any age to be learning. So we're not just talking about the young. This survey went all the way through to people who were closing in on retirement in Hong Kong. You know, the retirement age here is 60. So we actually then thought about, what about vocational training? What about retraining for those middle managers who might be 35 to 45, or even thinking about those people who are the 45 through to 55 and 60 who are in the next phase of their careers. So we're looking at programs now, things like Explore ML, Explore Machine Learning, and rolling those programs out across Hong Kong. I think for me, when I think about smarter technologies for Hong Kong, Smart City normally ends up being about infrastructure and, you know, power generation, your sustainable goals here, things like environment, etc. That kind of makes sense in terms of pollution control. But for me, in an immediate sense, if I'm thinking 12 months, 2 years, 3 years out, the immediate thing that I think about in terms of being a smarter city is taking what we have today and recombining those technologies in a way that provides benefit tomorrow in a very near term. And the best way that we can do that is through the better application of digital technologies. And some of that is in the education sector in terms of how we train up the next generation of talent. And some of that is in the corporate sector in terms of how we use faster, lighter, smarter tools to be able to deliver really interesting applications for Hong Kong citizens in a much shorter period of time. Mm-hmm. So I'm very much about the benefit equation, if that makes sense. I'm quite impatient. You know, if something is going to take longer than about 5 years, I've lost interest like a millennial and I just want to run off and do something else with my life. So everything that we do, we try and bring back into these kind of 12-month, 24-month programs and see what we can do that's really impactful for Hong Kong and that can drive change.
And when it comes to these then changes that are needed to bring a smart city forward, organizations forward, this digital integration and transformation, I heard you say in an event at the Marketing Society actually that there are a lot of naysayers that you're confronting within your organizations. What tip do you have for people out there to then actually not get stuck with even gathering that commitment from the people that are the decision makers, and then you have a change maybe in the management board and it's been all in vain, right? There was someone who wanted to push it within the team, but then it's just all falling apart. I think there is something about the Sustainable Development Goals that it's really important to talk about. Is always mentioned nowadays that we've been a few years in, is that urgency and that need for people to actually commit, make the changes, move forward, implement. But how do you cope with this human emotions that are still, of course, part of the whole process, that there will always be people, especially when it comes to tech, and just looking at myself, how long it takes me to implement things, that people are always a little bit worried. Like, can I trust this change?
Yeah, look, it's a really good point. I think one of the things, I've been involved in the tech industry for 2 decades, for about 20 years now. And my background was quite different. I started in, just in advertising. I used to make TV ads in 1991. I thought that was the coolest thing ever, to go out on a TV shoot. They had the little food van, cool. And they had people that had like television cameras, and that was my version of tech back then. I thought it was the coolest thing. In 1991, when I started with BP in Australia, it took a day to send an email. 1 day, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I left university, I start at my desk, I've got a green screen terminal, the mainframe, and a PC with an A and a C drive. So I had 2 computers on my desk. Again, I'm thinking I am the coolest kid that left university. And I remember ringing my friends on virtually like a Bakelite phone, because we didn't have mobile phones in 91 for everybody, and telling them that there was this thing called email. And I could send an email to London and it would arrive tomorrow, right? Because we used to batch them up and send them across a mainframe. And in a very short period of time in my working career, the massive change that's gone on, and now the instantaneous expectation of information send and response is great, but it has also created a whole bunch of problems for the generation of kids that are coming through, in terms of attention deficit, in terms of microtasking is not actually efficient. All of these sorts of things are actually a drain, I think, totally on well-being. And there is, I think, a little bit of a mindset of how much change should be good for us versus when is it just a little bit too much. So there's an understandable, I think, underlying issue of benefit. When is the benefit actually going to outweigh risk, is one way that I look at it. There's an underlying issue, I think, of trust. You have to make sure that trust is built into whatever it is, whatever change it is that you want to make. It's got to come from the right place. And I think there's also an underlying issue that we have to accept as humans, that there's mindsets are built over time. Inertia is actually a natural state for most. Right, there's a kind of a standing still, and a little bit like the rolling stone that gathers no moss. I think at some point a lot of people kind of hit a point where they say, actually, it's just enough. I just want to stop for a while, and that happens in corporations as well. In any organisation, you get these combinations of it's just too much. Right, I'm not sure I can trust it, and really, why should we bother to change? And so when you're looking at doing sort of scaled technology changes, or even just an implementation of a new technology, switching from an iPhone to an Android, there's suddenly all of these things that you actually have to consider. And it becomes a little bit like looking at change management programs. You need to understand the psyche of the people that you're trying to benefit. Where are they today? How would you convince them and influence them rather than tell them? And in my experience, in terms of the technology projects that I've been involved with over the years, where you've had some kind of big bang project that's been dictated from on high, and the command comes down to say, this is the way that it's going to be, and everybody's just going to start doing these things this way, was only successful to a point. The vast majority of those projects, there used to be an adage in tech which was 80% of major project implementations fail. And they don't fail because of the technology, they fail because people won't adopt it. So there's a fundamental shift, I think, between where I was in the early part of my career, which was very much about big systems, let's make sure that we have all these controls, it's all about the process, to today, to thinking much more about smaller systems, more localisation, and actually thinking about putting that control back into the hands of the individuals. So I think we're seeing a much more empowered workforce, which is great. We're seeing a much more empowered community, and this is evident through the technologies that everybody's using. But what it doesn't necessarily always mean that we get the changes that we need to have happen in the right order at the right time. It requires a really interesting skill set, I think, to be able to navigate the complexity that's been created across people process technology. So, is it easier or harder than it used to be? It's different. And I think the skill sets that are emerging today in terms of being able to implement technology have changed quite massively. This fundamental understanding of humans and human communication and human interaction with technology has really come to the fore. User experience has come to the fore. Design thinking has come to the fore. And then also this idea around not just change management, but change influence. Thinking about how you can influence people to believe that this is the right change to make at the right time. And, that's opening up, I think, a whole range of potential new job opportunities that haven't even been created yet. I often do talks at schools and universities in Hong Kong, and I say to people, think about this for a second. When I graduated university in 1990, my job didn't exist. My company didn't exist. So how could I possibly have prepared to be the managing director of Google in Hong Kong? And the short answer is I didn't. I think I've been quite lucky to make it here, and thank you, Google, for employing me and continuing to employ me. But the point is, all along the way, it's a constant re-education, it's a constant embracing of change, and it's a constant positive and optimistic attitude that I've had around, if I can do some of these things, if I can adopt some of these things, if I can be involved in that project, what are the benefits? And over that period of time, which is now nearly 3 decades, that kind of open, positive, optimistic attitude to technology has really helped me. And I'd love to see more of that. We actually need more good guys. There's a fantastic YouTube that Obama did on cybersecurity and technology, and he talks about how you need more good guys implementing this sort of stuff, and more representation from across diverse groups, whether that's male and female, whether that's different gender identities, whether it's different ethnicities, religions, etc. You actually need all of that representation to be able to build the tech that's then going to represent those groups in terms of the complexity. There's no longer a one-size-fits-all. It has to actually be the opposite. It's actually one-size-fits-me.
Mm-hmm. I love that word optimistic that I actually hear, and have now going into my research, looking more into the Google story as well, how it all started. That optimism and that dream of thinking you can do something, having bigger dreams than you think that are even possible for you, and going in with this optimism is something that I've found a lot within I think in the company culture as well. So how would you then, having that optimistic outlook, and I love that because I'm this hopeless optimist that believes in that we actually can achieve these 17 goals if we all work together. But then, of course, you see in every one of these goals these massive challenges, and also when it comes to technology, the massive worries that are there as well. Like just for example, with having jobs being created at one hand side, yes, but also jobs being made redundant by machines and AI that might replace, or that the outlook is that jobs will be replaced, and many of them will be replaced that are now done by women. So where is I need some optimism from you here now as well, just to kind of like to confirm my optimistic outlook as well, to say, okay, we can look at this problem or forecast, but how are we actually tackling that?
So Eric Schmidt, who from Google many years ago, said he was a job elimination denier in terms of the application of AI and ML. I have to agree with that. So it's actually not necessarily true that AI and machine learning is going to replace jobs. I went to a very interesting presentation by one of the vice presidents of FedEx. FedEx globally is one of the biggest airline companies in the world because they're shifting goods all across the world. They've got one of the biggest trucking and transport fleets, including vans, across the world. I asked the question of this vice president in terms of, job elimination, and he said, Leonie, we can't find enough people to fill the jobs that we have today. What's actually happening, and particularly in Western countries or countries who have very high levels of education, 3 out of 5 kids are leaving school and going to university. Very few of those kids want to do those jobs. So, we have had labour shortages. I know in Australia, where I'm from originally, there are labour shortages. In the US, there are labour shortages here in Hong Kong as well as in the UK, because there's a whole range of jobs that still exist today that people don't want to do. These are driving jobs, these are call centre jobs, right? These are service jobs. If you talk to the Retail Management Association of Hong Kong, they'll tell you that it's very difficult for them to find talent, even to keep their shops fully staffed. So it's one of those things in the global war for talent, in the rise, I think, of education, which is great. There's been an unintended consequence that as kids do 12 years of education and then go on to university, there are a lot of jobs that they see that they don't want to do, that they see they're beneath where their educational standards are, and that leaves a hole in terms of our net productivity because we just don't have enough labour. AI and machine learning can help in some of those areas, which is why a lot of companies over the years have pursued things, like robotics, etc., because what they're actually doing is supplementing their workforces. When I started working in the 90s, there was always this catchphrase when we were doing big system implementation of moving people to higher value tasks. That was one of my personal favourites. It used to confuse me. I'm like, you're going to move them to a higher value task, okay. Actually now, 2 decades later, I can finally understand what that means. It's not necessarily higher value tasks. What we're doing is we're actually combining humans and machines to be able to have a net higher productivity, because we simply don't have enough people to do a lot of this work. So it's quite interesting, I think, thinking about the applications for AI and ML in terms of a complement to people as opposed to a replacement for. So again, that's how I look at it. I gave a talk probably about a year and a half ago at HSBC, and I posed the question to this audience and said, when the smartest person in the room is a machine, what are you going to do? And I, of course, got stunned silence as a response. People just looked at me. And the reality is, the smartest person in the room is already a machine in a lot of respects. Machines have overtaken humans in terms of net compute power for certain things. So if you give a specific problem to the machine, they can calculate that much faster than a human can. But can they do things like EQ? Can they look outside of the boxes that they've been given in terms of deciding which problems they want to solve? No, they can't. So one of the things that I always look at in terms of AI and ML is this complementary set between where we are today and the needs that we have and where we want to go. How can we actually use machines, technology, robotics, whatever it is that we want to apply to actually supplement and complement the human experience?
Earlier you mentioned the talent. Some of our listeners out there might now think about their own career options. Our younger listeners are maybe just exploring some of their options that they have out there. Some might be in a transition. So you working in tech, and I want to bring this up now, not having that background, and we touched upon that. You said to these kids when you meet them, like, I could never expect where I'm sitting today looking at what was possible in the 80s or 90s. Yeah. And you were a geologist by your education background. So how would you encourage people to actually, and maybe especially women, to look into a career in tech? So
there's two. I'll answer that question in two ways. Starting with, I think, vocational or sort of shifting your career sort of mid-career. So I kind of shifted into tech in my late 20s. I guess I was nearly 30. And it was quite funny because that was I was 30, it was 1999. And I started in a friend's internet startup. And I'd go around and I'd meet these like 19, 20, 21-year-old millionaires back in the first boom of tech during the dot-com era. And it was super funny because people used to look at me and go, wow, you're really old to be starting in tech. And I was like 30. I mean, it's 20 years ago, for goodness sake. And I just would kind of look at people and go, and shrug my shoulders and get on with it. I actually didn't know anything realistically about tech. My brother, who is a Unix systems architect, he is tech, right at an infrastructure level, I think just rolled his eyes when I got a job in tech, like, oh my God, what the hell do you know about this? And the reality was I knew nothing, but I am innately curious, and I will absolutely admit that I don't know something about a subject, but I will arm myself with the people to be able to ask stupid questions of, and the ability to go and learn. I'll do a lot of study. So I threw myself headlong into tech. I spent time in the company that I was with, we had associations with university professors as advisors. We had some very smart tech people, and I would go and be curious and ask them questions without assuming that I knew anything, and just really started from the bottom and worked my way up. Even really simple explanations of how things like the internet work. You know, how does it work? How many people actually know that? Right? Why do we have bits and bytes? What does that actually mean? What is a pixel? Right? Why? All of these things today, which have become part of the vernacular, if you think about 20 years ago, even saying, oh, I build an application, that was the job that I had when I first started in tech. We did application development. None of my friends knew what the hell that was because we didn't talk about apps 20 years ago. So when you're in that sort of frame and there are no rule books, there's very little education about it. The best way to learn is like an apprenticeship. You learn from the ground up, you learn by doing, and you learn by making mistakes. So that's how I was able to shift careers. I think the other thing is you can't just go from zero to hero. So because of the story that I tell about my own career, I often get people reaching out to me saying, well, you managed to shift from this into tech, and I want to do the same thing. I want to work for Google. And I'm like, yeah, no. It took me 15 years of my tech career before Google would actually consider me to come and work for this company. Hand on heart, Google would not have employed me in my 20s. I didn't have a tech background. Right? I didn't come from that industry. I'd worked for some very large companies and startups, but I wasn't yet of the sort of calibre that a very large tech company like Google would appreciate. So what did I have to do to get here? I had to start at the ground and rework my career. So starting with a much smaller company, learning all those things, having great advisors around me, taking risk. And the risks that I took in the late 90s into early 2000 actually paid off in terms of learning, but didn't pay off in terms of money. So I ended up with a capital loss. The first tech business that I was in was a startup. It went into a liquidation event. Fantastic learning opportunity. Possibly wouldn't recommend it to everybody because, you know, not everybody wants to go through a liquidation event. But again, this is some of the, if you're really, really keen to make this sort of shift, I think you have to accept that you might end up doing a job first off that you might think is a little bit of a step backwards. You may end up having to take a step backwards in terms of salary, so there's risk there. And you might also have to take a risk in terms of the company that you join might not succeed. So there's no going straight from zero to hero. There's no kind of saying, actually, I think I'm probably the right fit for a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon, etc. right now without having had that background. But there is a path if you choose to take, a slightly slower, slightly more difficult path by going and working in some of these organisations and getting yourself ready, if that's what you want to do. At the other end of the spectrum, when we think about, actually getting into university and studying things like tech, so there's two things, and particularly for women, and particularly in Hong Kong, that we need to focus on. So if we look at computer science in Hong Kong, the total number of female graduates is only about 18 or 19%, 1 in 5. That number strongly correlates with the experience of the UK, the US and Australia. So roughly in all 4 of those places, 1 in 4 computer science graduates is women. Moreover, problem is, that 1 in 5, they don't all end up as software people or hardware people. They end up in marketing, they end up in investment banks, they go and do other things, because by the time they finished their degree, they actually get snapped up for all these other opportunities, or they just decide that it wasn't really what they wanted to do, that their heart isn't really in it anymore. And why is that? It's because I think over time, being in an environment that actually isn't supportive of women can be a little bit wearing, and especially for a lot of these young women and girls. One of the things that we actually also know from the research in Hong Kong is a lot of girls are more engaged with tech much younger than boys. So boys and girls in Hong Kong are equally good at things like gaming. So we always have this vision of a gamer being some young man sitting behind a computer in the dark. In fact, in Hong Kong we have a lot of women and young girls all the way through to women in their 40s and 50s who are gamers. This is one of the most densely populated cities for gamers. I think there's something like 2+ million active gamers out of 7 million people.
My goodness.
Right? We're in like the top 10 in the world.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and gamers are awesome in terms of a recruitment place for future tech and future entrepreneurs, because they get it. So that's cool. That's a good start. When you look at platforms like a social platform, whether that be an Instagram or a YouTube or anything else, you actually see that girls are slightly more engaged in a lot of those programs in terms of their use of those programs, their adoption, and even their net content contribution. That's cool. But then what happens when they hit about 16 is that tech isn't cool for them anymore. So if you ask those girls versus boys if they wanted to go into a career in tech, most of the girls will say no. Even if they're good at coding, even if they're good at mathematics, they, in Hong Kong, have this mindset that tells them, and the Women's Foundation did some great research on this, there's a mindset that tells them that boys are naturally better at these things, so they should go and do something else. And it blows my mind, because I was a math science student, right? I have 2 older brothers who are also good at math and science, and my whole life when I was a kid was keeping up with them and proving that I could run alongside them. I never for a moment, and my parents never for a moment, made me feel like I wasn't as smart as my brothers, right? And so this attitude around math and science, math in particular, boys are just naturally better at that. I had never really contemplated that people believe that to be true. But now that I look back, I can see that that's actually prevalent in a lot of different societies. It's actually not just Hong Kong. So there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of busting these myths about, do we have a natural propensity for one thing? The male and female brain's actually different. Yes and no. When it comes to things like math and science, absolutely not. The propensity to be able to learn, the propensity to be good at tech as a coder or a hardware developer, a network engineer, a software engineer, whatever it is exactly the same potential, regardless of the way that you look at that net population. What's different is the nurturing. What's different is the role modelling. So typically what we find is that teachers and parents will say, oh, don't do that, darling. That'll be a little bit too hard for you. Wouldn't it be better if you were a lawyer, a doctor, or an accountant? Those are roles that really would suit a young girl, and you're smart, so you should go and do that instead of going and doing something hard like tech, which possibly doesn't pay as much money. I think that's also the other attitude here. And it's really interesting to me to see that a lot of that pressure is actually applied not just by their own peer group, but a lot of it's from the parents. And then, when we think about role models, the work that I've been doing with the Women's Foundation in Hong Kong, which is terrific, and other organisations, is to try and find these local role models, tech entrepreneurs, women in tech, educators, etc., so that these, young girls and boys can look up and see a representative role model that they could be like, right? It's not just that they're looking up and they're seeing Jack Ma, Pony Ma, Robin Lee, Sergey Brin or anyone else. They're actually looking up and they're seeing female entrepreneurs. And I'm really happy that in Hong Kong, I've probably met more female entrepreneurs and business leaders in tech than any other place that I've been in the world. And in fact, most of my peers, if I think about the major tech companies in Hong Kong, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, all female managing directors. So we're actually doing a really good job these days in terms of building more role models. I think the job now is to go and work within, again, the school system and within a lot of these community organisations, etc., to make sure that we have the right role modelling, that these kids are getting the messages, that they can be just like that. It's not that difficult. Right? Does that make sense?
Totally.
Sorry.
And I love the positive spin to this. Very uplifting and I think encouraging for listeners out there that might explore these options, younger listeners to really look into that and just look out for these role models as well that are out there, like women like you that are in the space and that are on...
Well, it's like you though. Remember you said learning about podcasting.
Oh my goodness, yes, but that's how we started our conversation off the record.
Yeah.
Right? But it's a lot of the topics that of course I bring up on Hashtag Impact are something that I see from my own experience. And starting this podcast, I thought I'd never be able to do it. I doubted that I thought it would be. I didn't even look into it. I just assumed it would be too difficult for me to understand. So anyone out there wanting to start a podcast, I can tell you that's really a very low tech entry, and it's totally possible even to. I have even managed to build my own website.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about it.
But I built a MySpace site once for my high school reunion. That's how old I am. It's probably still up somewhere in the internet.
I used to have MySpace. What happened? And then
MySpace
all of them boom,
evaporated.
It just evaporated. But yes, I had one as well. That was fun
but
to
that's
create.
The other thing, I think, I was reflecting on this morning as I was coming to the office. They say a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, but actually when you're young in tech, a little knowledge actually is a good thing. Because sometimes the craziest of ideas that have ended up being the biggest of companies have just started because somebody thought, I'm just going to give this a go. And they haven't thought about, wow, what happens if it doesn't work? Because they're not really worried about the risk. And a good example, I was lucky enough to meet Jeffrey Prentice, who's the co-founder of Skype, who actually lives in Hong Kong. He runs a VC called Oriente. And Jeff was a couch surfing, punk music loving kid in an investment bank who co-founded Skype. Right? And when he started their company as, a mid-20s something, did he know everything about where it was going to end up? Absolutely not. And I always think about that kind of experience. I think about my own experience as a late 20s, early 30s, joining a startup, and I didn't really know anything. And the world was just full of opportunities. And every time somebody would come and talk to me about a potential project or a piece of tech, I used to think, why not? Let's give that a chance. Like, how could we build that? As opposed to, ooh, can't be done. And I think, again, it's one of those things in terms of mindset. What happens over time, and, for me, I'm facing my 51st birthday soon. Your experience almost becomes an anchor at some point because you've seen so many things that you have a tendency to say, oh, I'm not sure we should try that because I've seen that happen before and this is what the net outcome of that project was. It didn't work. What you have to do instead, and especially for the young, this is what's so great about having a whole bunch of millennials in your organisation, is that they don't have any of that baggage. They think very positively about, okay, what could the benefits be and why not try doing something like that? And so I think this combination as well, in terms of a workforce, between those who have the experience, you know, in Google we'd call it the greyglers, the people with the grey hair.
The greyglers.
The greyglers. Yeah.
That's hilarious, yeah.
All the way through to our, university graduates who are joining the company. What we have to do is kind of balance experience and enthusiasm and make sure that those who have experience aren't squashing the enthusiasm of the millennials that just want to drive change. And it's a really interesting balancing act. And it's something that I have to be honest, I just adore about the organisation that I work with, because it is optimistic. We do think in terms of possibility. We always think about projects locally here in Hong Kong that can be both helpful and hopeful. And I think it's one of those things that if you can park, I think some of the disappointments that you might have experienced in your own life in terms of work projects that may not have worked, if you can park some of that experience that says, ooh, maybe don't try that, that's going to be a little bit risky, to actually move more as an older stakeholder, you know, myself as a more senior manager, into this kind of why not attitude. Let's see what happens. Let's take some calculated risks and let's empower these teams that want to drive change with time, some resources, and a little bit of money to go and see what they can create when they're truly enthusiastic about that idea and they want to own it and deliver it. I think you can see some remarkable things happen. And, you know, we've been lucky enough, I think, here in Hong Kong, when we've done this with even some of our community projects. CS First, for example, volunteer project, now reached over 1,000 kids, literally started it as an idea. You know, one of the teams said, I think this is a good idea, I'd like to run with it. And we all said, sure, what do you need? As opposed to, gosh, aren't you really busy doing all of these other things? Do you think you really want to do that? It's a very different mindset in terms of how you think about coaching and encouraging people to drive positive change.
And that's actually already leads me to the closure of our interview. I could sit here and talk for hours with you. That what you just said about the bringing all of these different people together, you know, the older generations, the younger generations, all the different stakeholders, is something so crucial, looking, of course, also at driving progress, looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, but beyond, because, of course, 2030 is a great time frame and I think a good deadline just to put some turn on the fire and make people really act now. But I mean, this is something looking beyond a timeline or a certain goal that has been phrased in a certain way for something, when looking at how can we turn our world into a place that is sustainable and more equal. And having then this creativity that you just mentioned and this calculated risks and that why not attitude is so important for all of these different goals that are now laid out in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to go make them change happen as well. Yeah. So with this, I actually want to take you to the #Impact quick fire round. Are you ready for it, Leonie?
I'm ready.
Making an impact means?
Making an impact means positive benefit for most humans. That's how I'd put it.
Who inspires you in the way they are tackling the Sustainable Development Goals?
My inspiration at the moment would have to be Greta Thunberg. I just think that is a tremendous role model for my kids in the world in terms of impact around climate change.
And to give our listeners some action points now as well, because I don't want people just to listen to the podcast. I actually want them to take action now as well. What could they do right now after they listen to this episode to make the world a better place?
Easy. Number one, be curious. To seek multiple information sources. Don't stick in your own bubble and see black as black and white as white. There are always areas of grey. embrace science. A lot of people think that science is the domain only of scientists. It is not. Science is interesting, it's fascinating, and more people need to be reading more about how science actually positively impacts us. Because ignorance is not bliss, ignorance is just ignorance. And so the enemy, I think, of progress is actually thinking that it's just ignorance and just staying in a little bubble. So that combination of curiosity, of embracing and understanding, of wanting to understand between somewhere the black and the white, what are the areas of grey, and then combining that all to think in terms of possibility is the way that I actually think about the world. So, you know, there are no right and wrong answers. There is no black and white. But I think ultimately, if we have the right mindset, if we can think about everything in terms of positive benefit and projects that actually drive positive benefit for humanity first and foremost, not technology, but humanity, I think we can see some really interesting things happen here in Hong Kong and across the world.
Thank you so much, Leonie.
That's right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on the show.
I hope you felt as if you were sitting right there with us at Google Hong Kong. And a big thank you goes to Leonie Valentine for taking the time, giving us these insights, and also for encouraging our listeners to take action. If you would like to become involved in our upcoming #Impact Season 5, then you can reach out to us at hello@impact.com. Head over to impact.com/season 5 to find more information on how you can partner up with us as you get your voice heard on the channel too. I recommend that you also hit subscribe from wherever you're listening right now to get more inspiration for your change-making journey. Thank you for joining us today. Talk to you soon. Bye.